Hello, everybody. My name is Kat Fleming, and this is my final presentation for the texture of time. So for my final presentation, I really wanted to explore these questions of what is the nature of time and how does our understanding of time affect consciousness? So these questions were really interesting to me because in the different spiritual communities that I hang out in, I've heard these different memetics about the nature of time, such as the present moment is all that exists, or time is an illusion. And I'm aware that the way that we relate to time is actually really important because as humans, so much of our existence and sense of self is spatio-temporal based. We experience ourselves as existing in space and time. So when we explore our relationship to space and time, we are also exploring our relationship to self. So in order to explore this inquiry more, I dove into J.T. Fraser's 6 temporalities, specifically how they connect with one another. And I also explored Carrie Welch's Fractal Spacetime, which seeks to integrate timelessness and time. Lastly, I am going to share some philosophical implications, specifically inspired by Henri Bergson, about how savoring time can lead to the transformation of consciousness. I did cover a lot in my paper, so for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to have to cherry pick and just share some of my favorite pieces, and I will also include a link to my paper in case you want to read more. So regarding J.T. Fraser's 6 temporalities, I was extremely intrigued by the relationship between the atemporal, the prototemporal, and the eotemporal. The atemporal can be conceived as having no meaningful laws, of being this chaotic realm, which then somehow the prototemporal emerges out of. So that emergence is not completely understood, though what we do know is that a quantum foam mysteriously arises, and in that quantum foam there are particles and antiparticles which tend to collide and annihilate one another, though sometimes one half of that pair is released and set free and then becomes subject to the quantum laws, and there the prototemporal realm is born. Then we have this relationship between the quantum laws and the eotemporal realm. This is really interesting to me because the prototemporal realm can be conceived as having an equal chance of forward and backward moving time. And then we have the eotemporal realm with unidirectional time. So how does this symmetrical time become asymmetrical time? This question is basically akin to the relationship between the quantum and classical, which there is not yet a consensus on the relationship between the two, though there are two main camps of theory. We have the quantum collapse-based theories, and then we have the no collapse theories. For the sake of my project, I chose to focus on collapse-based theories because they're well accepted and coincide nicely with orchestrated objective reduction, which I find to be a really beautiful perspective of consciousness. So, in short, we have the quantum realm, particles in superposition, and at some point they collapse, which causes an irreversible relationship with the quantum or with the classical realm. And when this quantum collapse happens, this is where entropy becomes really relevant, and there's this forward moving sense of time, this movement towards increasing complexity or an increasing chaos. And that very much coincides with our perception of unidirectional time. Just to point out a few other pieces that I really enjoyed from the 6 temporalities, I really loved the relationship between the prototemporal and the biotemporal, because essentially this is exploring how timelessness folds into time, how the energy of photons folds into the matter on our planet. So one example of this is light from the sun pouring into a leaf and folding into the time-bound matter of the leaf. Another example is light meeting our retinas and going through a physiological process to create this sense of biotemporal and nuotemporal time. We also have this relationship between the eotemporal and biotemporal, where the solar and lunar cycles lend to circadian rhythms, which create this sense of chronology on planet Earth. So that's just a little bit about the 6 temporalities and how they all relate to one another. And one of my main takeaways from Fraser's framework is that timelessness is real, the past and future are real, the present moment is real. Time is simply very textured. It's not quite as uniform as we see, though all these different perspectives of time in their own respects are real and worth considering and integrating into one framework. So I really appreciate that integral piece right there. Moving on, we have Carrie Welch's Fractal Topology of Time, which I'm a huge fan of and excited to share a little bit with you today. So, fractals and time have a lot in common. There is an unpredictable rate of change, repeating and nesting cycles, complex relationship between finite and infinite, where there's infinite length yet finite surface area, scale divergence, and non-differentiability. So again, a lot to talk about there. I'm going to focus on the relationship between infinity and finite and this idea that we are actually deepening into time. So you might recall the coastline paradox, where we have 2 finite points, that there's actually infinite complexity in between those 2 finite points, depending on what type of measuring apparatus we use. So similarly, there is this infinite fractal edge between matter and energy, where the more you zoom in, the more complexity and detail is available. And we see this in the topology of time, where the more you zoom in, there's actually more and more divisions and more infinite detail. So this lends to the idea that we are infinitely deepening into time. This can also be experienced in subjective time, where Welch offers 3 main variables, which are repetition, attention, and intention. And with these 3 variables, there's the compression of memory, which is pulling time into us, in which our minds and bodies deepen into time. Yeah, so much to say. I'll leave it there for the sake of this video. In conclusion, we just covered J.T. Fraser's 6 temporalities, as well as Carrie Welch's Fractal Topology of Time. And one of my main takeaways and one of the main things I want to share with you is that there's this relationship between timelessness and time, and that they're integrated together, operating in duet. Now I will share some of the philosophical implications and personal impact that I am taking away from this class. So to restate something I said at the beginning of this video, humans are spatiotemporal creatures, so our relationship to time affects how we relate to ourselves. And I definitely changed the way that I relate to myself by taking this class. So one of my main takeaways is understanding that often I am only skimming the surface of time, and that if I can slow down and match my internal frequency to the external frequency, I'm able to experience this timelessness, this no time, and I can really sink into the present moment there. And when I sink into the present moment, I'm able to find more richness and more texture and more intensity. And that alone is fantastic. When I find more richness, more intensity, more texture, I have a greater sense of aliveness. I have this sense of having more intimacy with life. For me, that brings a lot of meaning and excitement into this existence. So that alone is great. Though I'll take it a step further by leaning on Henri Bergson, who says that intensity leads to more emotions, which leads to sympathy and a love for all things, which leads to humility, which leads to morality and the transformation of consciousness. I know that was a long thread there. Again, read my paper if you would like. But point being, by slowing down and savoring, we experience more intimacy and then more intensity. And that intensity leads to more emotion, more love, more humility, greater morality, and the transformation of consciousness. Additionally, to play off Bergson a little bit, Bergson says that when we really tune into this intimate relationship with life and enter our direct experience, we are reminded of the durational, fluid, dynamic quality of life. We are connected to this absolute thread, this absolute process that weaves through and connects all things. And when we connect to that sense of process, it's very humbling. It humbles the ego, it releases our clinging to static identities, and it opens our hearts to the fluid evolution of life. So again, by tuning into intensity, by savoring the present moment, we can experience this transformation of consciousness. To me, I just think that this is so beautiful. There are few things more beautiful to me than really savoring the present moment. Even if that moment is uncomfortable, even if it's intense, I just love this divine experience of being a human in a body that gets to feel sensations. And I love this notion that feeling sensations can actually open our hearts, soften us, and lead to the transformation of consciousness. And for me, I find that savoring by slowing down, by understanding temporality, and by having a sense of agency in how I relate to time. So thank you so much for tuning into this video. It was really fun to share with you some of my main takeaways from the course, and such an honor to be in this program with all of you. This is such beautiful work that we are doing. Thank you all so much, and I really look forward to hearing your presentations and reading your papers. Thank you, and have a good night. Bye-bye.